Hey everybody, welcome back. So in this video I am going to be testing the Sefaspe. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. That is how it is spelled, Sefaspe MIG 205DS welder. This welder was sent to me by Sefaspe for the purpose of this review, so thanks to them. Sefaspe calls this a 6-in-1 multifunction welder. The reason I was attracted to this welder in particular was because for an inexpensive welder, it has some very interesting features, I think. First and foremost, they're calling this pulsed MIG, and I have never seen true pulsed MIG on a machine of this price. We'll talk about pulse versus short circuit here in a bit, but before we go any further, let's just do a quick walk around of it and let's see what comes with it. So first off, what's in the package? The machine itself, obviously. You get about an 8-foot long power cord that terminates in a 110 volt plug. You get a quick start guide. You get a very small, simple, but reasonably decent looking manual. You get about 8-9 foot long stinger for stick welding. You get an 8 or 9 foot long ground clamp. You get a 110 to 220 adapter. You get a MIG gun with it's about 9 feet that has a reasonable ball on the end and some strain relief there I like. Got a pretty decent feeling trigger. Comes with a 0.8 millimeter nozzle on it. You also get an extra 1.0 nozzle. You get 2 feed rollers. One of these feed rollers is grooved and it's ridged on the bottom, I should say, and it's 0.9 and 0.8, and you get one that's grooved and smooth on the bottom, and it's 1.0 and 0.8. You also get a little wrench with it, and you get about a 10-foot long gas hose. When we look at the front, we have a button here. We have 2 knobs. I believe the knobs also have a click function. Don't know what they are yet. We have the digital display. We have the Euro connector for the MIG gun or the spool gun. We have the dongle that allows you to change polarity. We have the connection point for the spool gun. On the side the wire goes in, we have a single latch and a hinged door that does not stay up on its own. And this is where the wire goes. This can take the larger spool of wire as well as the little bitty spools like they sell down at the hardware store. And this is where the wire feeds through and the feed roller goes. On the top of the machine, all we have is the handle and a little warning probably how not to electrocute ourselves. On the back of the machine, we have the power cord. We have a power button at the top. We have a little plaque here that tells us the duty cycles. We have the fan inlet and we have the gas hose connection. So I think we should talk for a second about pulsed MIG versus short circuit MIG, which is what we're all used to. In the standard short circuit MIG, the wire comes out of the tip of the gun, strikes the material or the weld puddle, short circuits, the arc goes out, the wire burns back a bit, and then it comes out and strikes again, melts back, and this happens over and over again, really many times a second. And that's where the bacon frying sound, the popping sound, and the spatter comes from. In pulsed MIG, the voltage or the amperage probably does not stay the same. It goes up and down in a wave, and that wave prevents the short circuit from happening. At the peak of the wave, the wire melts, sprays at the material in globules or fine spray, and then the amperage drops. And it doesn't go off, it drops to a background level that prevents the arc from going out. And this happens hundreds of times a second. It can sound more like a TIG than a MIG welder. You get far less spatter, you get a much smoother weld, they can even look like TIG welds, and you get less heat and less warpage. But I'm finding out that there are certain parameters you have to follow to get that to work the best. One is a very expensive mix of gas. You need an argon CO2 mix, and in a high concentration of argon, usually at least 90% argon or more, and CO2, or even something like 98% argon, 2% oxygen. Those are expensive gases to buy compared to the typical CO2 I normally buy to do short circuit MIG. But the advantages can be there. Now, I'm told there are 2 types of pulsed MIGs, actually more than 2 types, but basically there are machines that were designed from the ground up to be a a pulsed MIG, much like the extremely expensive Miller I had a chance to use a few years ago. And then there are the lesser expensive ones like we're dealing here that are probably originally designed to be a short circuit MIG, but then had pulse functionality added in. None of the settings that you're going to see on an $8,000 Millermatic are going to be here. You know, slope, upward slope of the pulse, downward slope of the pulse adjustment, background voltage or amperage, peak voltage or amperage. None of those settings are here. So this is a synergic machine, so it's adjusting all of that for us automatically to what the manufacturer sees fit. How well this will work with CO2? I have no idea. How will it work with flux core wire? I have no idea. Well, there's such a thing as pulsed stick welding, so I'm assuming if we can pulse stick weld, we can pulse flux core wire weld. Hopefully we'll get a smooth weld, we'll get less spatter, and things will work even better than it would with a short circuit flux core. I'm excited about finding out. Maybe you will be too. Anyway, let's get on with it. So let's take a quick look at the front panel of this machine and the controls. First thing you notice when you power it up is it has no fan sound because it has a smart fan. Next thing you'll notice is the big bright display. This display can be read from across the shop and it can be read at any angles. It shows us what type of voltage we're plugged into. Right now I'm plugged into 110 volts AC, and it shows us, and it says MMA here. If you can't see that little writing in the camera, it says MMA. That is the last thing it was set to when I turned it off last time. We have two knobs and a button. The knobs can be turned, they can also be clicked, although I have not found anything this one does when you click it. So we're in MMA mode, we can move the amperage up and down. The voltage knob does nothing. If we click the voltage knob, it will switch into the VRD setting and we can control voltage reduction. If we click our button one time, our mode button to go down, we go into lift TIG mode. Now in lift TIG mode, we pretty much have the same thing. We can control amperage and not much else. And this button here does nothing in lift TIG mode. If we go down one more, we get into MIG mag mode. Now mag is metal active gas. We're using solid core wire with something like CO2 and active gas. And in here, we can press this button and it switches between 2T and 4T. The next thing we can do is we can adjust wire speed up and down with our amperage knob. And amperage goes up and down with wire speed. And you'll notice that voltage goes up and down with wire speed as well, because this is a synergic machine. One thing to note is this readout, I'm convinced, is in inches per minute. But our marking is in meters per minute, but 200 meters per minute would be bonkers. So this is actually inches per minute, and it corresponds with my other machines that read out in inches per minute and have a voltage reading. So I'm convinced that this is actually inches per minute. Now we have some other settings here if we use this button as well. And this machine, you got to be quick because it switches back on you really fast. So if I press it once and start to turn, I get a little icon here that looks like a spray MIG icon. And this allows me to adjust arc length up and down, 30% down and 30% up. Note that arc length adjustment also changes the voltage. So if I look with my arc length set to the 0 setting, I have 17.4 volts. If I change that up, say 10%, it moves that to 19.1. So, and that's how it should be. Voltage should go up and down with arc length. Otherwise, this is a complete synergic machine. It does not really allow you to control voltage as a fine tuning other than as a function of arc length. So I want to get this back to 0 because I want to start with it on the 0 settings. If we click this button twice, we get our inductance set up. Unfortunately, the manual it comes with does not describe these settings at all and what they do and how you should set them, so it's going to be a discovery. So let's go back to that. This is our inductance setting. We can go up, doggone it, we can go up 20% or we can go down 20%. That is my settings in MIG mag. If I come down one more, I go to MIG mix. Now, this tells the machine I am running a mix gas like 75% argon, 25% CO2, and I have the exact same settings in MIG Mix as I had in MIG Mag. Note also that the settings are independent of one another. I can have a different setting for MIG Mix as I do for MIG Mag. If I press the button to go one more time down, I go to Flux core wire. Now I have the exact same settings in Flux core as I have in MIG Mix and MIG Mag, and again, they are independent settings. If I go down one more, I get the spool gun, and the spool gun setting is like the other settings. I'm going to have the same inductance and the same spray MIG adjustments. Everything else is the same. Nothing changes for me right now while I'm in spool gun mode, and I'm guessing it's because I do not have a spool gun attached. There's also a little icon up here that tells you when you're in inching mode, and there's going to be a light on here that says when you've overheated it and exceeded the duty cycle. So I think that pretty much covers the front panel and the adjustments. A couple of things worthy of note here when you load the wire in. If you're using a little bitty spool, you know, the 2-pound spool, such as that one, you're going to want to remove this part on there. This just comes off completely. And then you just put the washer spring and the nut back on. Another thing worthy of note is this nice label here that's stuck on the inside of the door. It tells you how to put this all back together, how to feed the wire, and how to hook it up depending on the different welding processes it can do. I am going to be starting with flux core welding because I think that's what most of us are going to do. This is Blue Demon 035 wire, or 0.9 millimeters. So we're going to start on 110 volts with the Blue Demon 035 flux core weld. I have been doing some welding with it just to kind of get a feel for the machine. That's down there. I've been messing around with the arc length and the inductance setting, and to be quite honest, it welds perfectly fine with flux core wire with no change to those two settings. I've changed them up and down, and to be honest with you, I'm not seeing any improvement, only making it worse. So while those two settings may have their place, I just don't see it with flux core welding on mild steel. Blue Demon 035 flux core wire. Machine is plugged into 110 volts. We're at 17 volts and 17.3 inches per minute. And I have a piece of 1/8-inch square tube that I was using a lot on the outside for practice, and I just chopped it open so I'd have some more real estate to weld on. All right, it welds perfectly fine on 110 volts at that setting. We'll let it cool down, scrape it off, and we'll have a look at it. Okay, there is that weld I just did on 110. It welds perfectly fine with flux core wire on 110. No problems there. So I'm going to switch to 220. All right, here we go. Flux core wire, 220. All right, couldn't tell any difference between the 110 and the 220. And here is that second weld on 220. Let's take a look. That's perfectly fine. If I wasn't trying to get the camera shot in, I could have made a straighter, smoother weld than that, but you know what? That's the price I pay for trying to have two cameras on it. All right, I'm switching to a solid core wire. This is a no brand name wire. I think it came with another welder I had. It is 0.8 millimeters, and I've used it a bunch. I'm almost out of the stuff. It's welded good for me. And I'm going to get that loaded up. I'm going to get the roller switched to the proper roller, the tip switched, and we'll do some more welding. Set up for solid core wiring. I'm set to MIG mag here. I have my polarity reverse so that my ground clamp is on negative. I'm still at 17.4 volts and 20 inches per minute. I have the gas hooked up and I am set between somewhere between 15 and 20 CFM. So let's do some welding. All right, I'm on 220. Interesting. It really is an interesting feeling machine. Every now and again, this machine gives me the feeling that if I just got the settings right, I would really have that pulsed MIG feel and weld bead, and everything would work the way I would expect it to from somebody who knew how to set the machine and not me, if that makes any sense. A little too hot for this. All right, run 70-18 fine. Let's get some 60-13. And it runs a fine bead with 60-13 on 110. So here's the welds I did with the machine. These are my first welds down here with Flux core, where I was really messing around with all those different settings on it with the arc length and the inductance setting. This is one of the stick welds. These are solid core gas welds. This is a stick weld, and these over here are stick welds. Well, I wanted to run some test plates here, or at least these little test weld pieces I made. I wanted to run several of them with the flux core and the solid wire, but I ran so many beads with the solid wire, just playing with the arc length and inductance settings, that I ran myself out of the solid core wire I was using. And it's a Sunday, of course, so there's no place to get any today. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the test plate with the blue Demon Flux core wire, which I have back in, and we are plugged back into 110 volts, and we're at 200 inches per minute. And it just dawned on me I didn't switch polarity back. So I ran that at the wrong polarity. So let me get another one up here and we'll run it at the right polarity, or maybe I'll just let that one cool and run the other side of it. But yeah, I ran that at the wrong polarity. So not only did I have the wrong polarity, I also still had it set to MIG mag. And honestly, other than the fact of all the ridiculous amount of spatter, it didn't really weld too badly like that. Let's try it. Let's try it set right. Why don't we do that? I bet it will work even better. Let's try this again, see if it works any better and set correctly. Oh, that's way better. Although, to be honest, I think it was running smoother in the other mode. All right, there we go. So just for fun, to show you, here's the weld I ran with it set to the wrong polarity and in the wrong mode. And look at all the spatter on it. Crazy, huh? And this is the one I ran set to the correct mode. So we've come to the part of the video where I get to tell you what I don't like, what I did like, and whether I think you should buy it. I have some notes here on my phone I took so that I make sure I get everything in. So first off, things I should have done. As I mentioned before, I should have had a mixed gas bottle here to properly test the pulse feature. My apologies to you guys if you were expecting to see that, and to Sefaspe for not having it ready. Hopefully it's something I'll be able to do in the future. So things I liked, let's get the things I didn't like out of the way first, because actually they weren't major. And one of the things I didn't like was the fact that the display reads meters per minute when it's actually reading out in inches per minute. That's pretty minor, and I don't think it's going to upset anybody too much, but nonetheless, it's there, and it shouldn't have been there. And nothing in the manual or the addendum clarifies that. Also, another thing I didn't like is the manual really doesn't cover the adjustments for arc length and inductance and how it affects the pulse welding at all. You want a nitpick? Here's a nitpick. The side door opens up but won't stay open. It doesn't open far enough past straight up. It just flops back down on you. Minor annoyance, but one that annoyed me more than once. And that was pretty much all I don't like. Okay, on to things I did like. First off, let me tell you, it welded really good. I had no issues with any of the welding. It welded really good. The beads all looked nice. I really had no issues with any of the welding processes that I tried. I like the fact that it'll run on 110 and 220, and the settings don't really change when you switch from one to the other. I can set it to weld a way that I like on 110. I can switch to 220 using that same process. Those settings still work exactly the same. It also has a very good range of adjustments. So you can go down to where you can weld thin materials with it, and you can go all the way up to where I believe it would probably run 1/4 inch just fine if you're, of course, plugged into 220. I really like the bright readable screen on it. You can read that screen from any angle, and you can read it from a good distance away as well. Another thing I liked about it is the fact that you can use the little bitty, 2-pound spools as well as the much larger 10-pound spool. What are they, 6-inch spools or 8-inch spools? I forget the size. But they are much more cost effective if you're running the same size wire over and over again. You don't have to change it as often, and it costs way less per pound of wire. I like the fact that it is a full synergic machine, and it seems to be very, very good for where things are set, at least again, for the processes that I tried. I like the fact that it can run a spool gun. That's something I really want to do in the future, and I'm looking forward. Looking forward to doing it. I have a couple of projects I want to build out of aluminum, and I am going to get a spool gun, an argon bottle, and I am going to be testing a spool gun. And at the same time, I'll do a better job working on the spray transfer welding and try and get that dialed in too for you guys. And another thing I like about this welder, it is an inexpensive entry into pulsed MIG welding, spray transfer MIG welding, if you will. And boy, it sure doesn't cost much for that. And I will put links below, affiliate links, of course, and coupon codes if I can get them. But for a couple of $100, $200-300, you can get into the realm of spray transfer MIG welding without having to go out and buy something like a Miller-Matic 335, which I think are $7,000-8,000 now. Not that it's not a great welder, but some of us, especially as hobbyist welders, we don't want to spend that much money on a welder, but we might want some of those really cool features. So I want to thank Sefaspe for sending this out for us to check out. I want to thank you guys for watching my videos. You will most likely see this again in the future when I get a spool gun and an argon bottle, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye for now.